It was the year 943 of the Empire of Osyra, a time when the cities of men flourished, ruled by iron-fisted emperors who waged war and spun webs of politics. But beyond the towering walls of civilization, the wilds still whispered with ancient power. And in those lands, there existed forces older than empires and realms. A power forgotten by most, but not by all. A young woman named Kira stood at the edge of the wormwood, her heart racing as the wind tugged at her cloak. Behind her lay the small village of Seron, where she had spent all of her 24 years. A place where her family was buried and her past lingered like a shadow. Ahead of her lay the unknown, a forest steeped in myth, a place no villager dared to enter save for the desperate. Kira was desperate. For as long as she could remember, Seron had been plagued by a curse. Crops withered, livestock perished, and sickness claimed lives each winter. No one knew how or why the curse had befallen them. But the elders whispered that it had begun long ago, when the first settlers angered the ancient spirits of the wormwood. The villagers had tried everything, prayers, offerings, even sacrifices. But the curse endured, growing stronger with each passing year. Kira's own family had not been spared. Her mother had succumbed to fever when Kira was just a girl, and her father had passed only a year ago, his body wasted away by an illness that no healer could explain. Her younger brother, Thomas, had been the last. He had fallen ill just days ago, and now he lay on the verge of death. The healers had done all they could. The village priest had offered his prayers, but nothing had worked. And now there was only one option left, the wormwood. Legends told of a spirit deep within the forest, an ancient being that had lived since the dawn of the world. Some called it the wormwood's heart, others simply the guardian. It was said that this spirit had the power to lift curses, to heal the sick, and to grant boons to those who were worthy. But no one who had ever sought the spirit had returned. Kira had no choice. She had prepared for days, gathering supplies and steeling herself for the journey. Now, as she looked into the dark, tangled forest, doubt gnawed at her. She had heard the stories of the wormwood, the wolves that walked on two legs, the trees that moved when no one was watching, the whispers that lured travelers to their doom. But Thomas's pale face filled her mind, and with a deep breath, Kira stepped into the forest. The wormwood was unlike any place Kira had ever seen. The trees were ancient, their gnarled roots twisting across the ground like serpents. The air was thick and heavy, filled with the scent of damp earth and moss. Sunlight barely penetrated the canopy above, casting everything in a dim greenish glow. The deeper she went, the more the forest seemed to close in around her, the path ahead growing narrower and more treacherous. For hours Kira walked, the sound of her footsteps muffled by the thick carpet of leaves beneath her feet. She had studied the old maps in the village archives, but they were little help now. There were no clear paths in the wormwood, no landmarks to guide her. All she had was the vague direction the villagers had always spoken of. Go north, to the heart of the forest. As the sun began to set, Kira felt the first stirrings of fear. She had not encountered any wolves or monsters, but the silence was oppressive, and the shadows seemed to watch her every move. She found a small clearing where she could make camp, her back pressed against a large tree. She built a small fire, though the wood was damp and the flames sputtered weakly. As she sat by the fire, Staring into the flickering flames, she heard it. A faint sound, like the whisper of a breeze, though the air was still. It was a voice, soft and indistinct, drifting through the trees. Kira! Her heart skipped a beat, and she jumped to her feet, eyes scanning the darkness. "Who's there?" she called, her voice trembling. There was no reply, only the rustling of leaves. "Kira!" The voice came again, closer this time, though still faint. It was a man's voice, familiar, though she couldn't quite place it. She swallowed hard, her hand reaching for the small dagger she kept at her belt. "I'm here," the voice whispered, and this time she knew it was Thomas. Kira's breath caught in her throat. "Thomas?" she stammered, her heart pounding in her chest. "Is that you?" But the only answer was the rustling of leaves, the soft whisper of the wind. Kira hesitated, her mind racing. It couldn't be Thomas. He was back in Seron, sick and dying. And yet, the voice had sounded just like him. Could it be the forest playing tricks on her? The wormwood was known for its illusions, for leading travelers astray with voices and visions. But if there was even a chance that it was Thomas, that he was somehow calling to her? She extinguished the fire and set off into the forest, her eyes wide, her ears straining to catch the sound of the voice again. The trees loomed taller around her, their branches twisted and gnarled, their bark dark and rough. The path beneath her feet was uneven, roots and stones jutting out at odd angles. "Kira!" The voice was closer now, leading her deeper into the forest. She followed it, her heart pounding, her breath coming in short gasps. The trees grew denser, the shadows longer, and the air colder. But still she pressed on, driven by the sound of her brother's voice. Finally, she reached a small clearing, and there, standing at the edge of the trees, was a figure. It was Thomas. He stood there, pale and thin, his clothes tattered, his eyes hollow. But it was him. Kira knew it. She took a step toward him, her heart aching with relief. "Thomas," she whispered, her voice trembling. "You're alive." But Thomas didn't move. His eyes, those familiar brown eyes, stared at her, empty and cold. Slowly, his lips parted, and he spoke. "Why did you leave me?" Kira froze, her blood turning to ice. What are you talking about? I didn't leave you. I'm here to save you." But Thomas shook his head, his expression unchanged. "You left me. You couldn't save me." Kira's heart pounded in her chest. No, that's not true. I came here for you. I'm going to find the spirit and lift the curse. I'm going to save you." Thomas's face twisted into a grotesque smile, and his voice took on a mocking tone. "You think you can save me? You think you can fix what's broken? You can't, you're too late." Kira backed away, her breath coming in ragged gasps. "No, this isn't real. You're not real. The forest is playing tricks on me." But Thomas stepped closer, his smile widening. "You're the one who's not real, Kira. You're the one who's lost." And with that, he dissolved into the shadows, his form flickering like a dying flame. Kira fell to her knees, tears streaming down her face. She had known, deep down, that the wormwood would test her, that it would try to break her. But she hadn't expected this this cruel reminder of her failure. She stayed there for what felt like hours, her body trembling, her mind racing. The forest around her was silent once more, the air thick with the weight of her despair. But then, from the darkness, she heard a new voice, a voice that was neither Thomas's nor her own. "You seek the heart of the forest." Kira looked up, her eyes red and swollen. Standing at the edge of the clearing was a figure, cloaked in shadows, its face hidden beneath a hood. The voice was deep and resonant, filled with an ancient power. "Who are you?" Kira asked, her voice barely a whisper. "I am the Guardian," the figure replied, "the one who watches over the wormwood. You seek to lift the curse that has plagued your village." Kira nodded, though her heart was heavy with doubt. I need to save my brother." The Guardian stepped forward, and as it did, the shadows seemed to ripple and shift around it. "The curse cannot be lifted," it said, "not without a price." Kira's breath caught in her throat. A price? What kind of price? The Guardian's eyes, two glowing orbs of light, fixed on her. The curse was born of blood. It can only be undone by blood. Kira's heart pounded in her chest. "You mean someone has to die?" The Guardian nodded slowly. "Yes, a life for a life. That is the way of the wormwood. That is the way of balance." Kira's mind raced, her thoughts spinning in a whirlwind of fear and desperation. Could she do it? Could she sacrifice someone else to save Thomas? Could she bear the weight of that choice? And then in